Hey everybody, this is Carl Brown from the Grand Valley Speech Lab. Thanks for taking the time to watch this PowerPoint. What I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about making an effective presentation. I know you all have an assignment where you need to get in a group and talk about your clients and your plan for them. And we're going to get into some key things that'll help you do that. However, the first thing I want you to think about is what people first see when you give a presentation. What do they notice about you? Many people will say that it's your clothing, your general appearance, or body language. And all of those are pretty correct. However, one specific thing stands out to me, and that's your face. It's what we seem to look at first. And because of that, I, first of all, want to endorse my favorite skincare products, the Dead Sea Skincare Company. These folks make outstanding products to keep your skin young and I'm kidding. I'm not here to hawk a skincare product, but the reason I bring this up is because if you look at the kiosk in the upper left-hand corner, you may recognize that or something similar from a mall that you have been in where these products are sold. Now, I've had an experience with these folks, and I'll keep it brief, but I had about $50 to spend on Christmas presents for 3 people, and I went to the mall to do that. And a long story short, I left with about $200 worth of skincare products for my gifts. Needless to say, I went easy on the gas that next week and only ate ramen noodles. But the point here is that these folks are very effective. They know what they're doing. They also go through about 6 months of training before they interact with you, and they bring you in. If you've ever interacted, you know how that goes. So while you may not be through this singular experience, ready to go out and bring people in and sell them hundreds of dollars of cosmetics or whatever else you're selling, in your case it's your idea, you should be a little more prepared to give an effective presentation. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, I imagine that for everyone in this room, it's true that you have written more papers than you have given presentations. In almost every class, there is some writing element. But in only a few classes are there speaking elements. So what we want to do is think about that core thing we already know, writing. We want to take that paper format and turn it into a nice, effective presentation. In order to do that, we need to think about 3 large topics. First, some differences and similarities between papers and presentations. Then we'll talk about some basics of the actual presentation, so the delivery aspects and preparation for delivery. Last, we'll talk a little bit about an effective visual aid. I know that you need one for this assignment, so some of the things may be common knowledge to you. You've had PowerPoint nearly your entire life, but I will give you some pointers that I think are most important. But to begin, let's start out with talking about differences and similarities between papers and presentations. So the first thing I'll tell you is to find the core of your paper and make that your presentation, and then think about translating your content for different audiences. So first of all, when you find the core of a paper, I want you to ask yourself the 4 questions that you see on the screen. 1, what must be included? What has to be there in order for your presentation to make sense? What is the thesis of your presentation? Once you identify that, you know that you need to keep that key central idea in the presentation and everything that supports it directly. Other things may be able to be left out, and that is the second question. What can be left out? If you think of many research papers, you'll probably write a long lit review that precedes the actual experiment or the findings that you're going to arrive at. And for your particular assignment, those findings are what your clients are interested in. They may want a little bit of background knowledge, but they probably don't need, for example, the entirety of your literature review. And that brings us to our third question. What does that audience want and need to know? Well, each audience is different. Some audiences already know quite a bit about what you're talking about. Others it's fairly new to them, while still more, especially in a business setting, want to know how your idea, your product, can help them in their business venture. And that is what you need to be really mindful of. Everything that you say in that key purpose of your paper should go back to helping out that client, that audience, understand what they need to know in order to be successful. And that's when you know if you're successful. The last question here is to know your time limit. Nothing can be said about you can't cover everything about anything in 10 minutes. It just won't happen. So don't try to include all of that information. As a quick example, if you have listened to the I Have a Dream speech, it is about 16 minutes long. And if you print that out on paper, it is 1.5 pages. So the reason I bring that up is to tell you not to try to come up with some nice pages to minutes ratio. It will not work out that way. So limit yourself, practice based on that time, but don't try to include everything. Well, now you found the core of the paper. Let's talk about translating it. First thing you'll want to consider is giving the audience a reason to listen. Now, in your situation, it seems fairly cut and dry. They need your advice, your ideas, in order to be more successful. And so, while it seems pretty obvious, state that for them explicitly. The reason I'm here today is to help you. And through this idea I'm going to share with you, I really think we can see that this is a great plan. And then tell them about the plan. During this time, though, consider your use of jargon. If you're not familiar with that, it's specialized language that is really only known by people in a certain trade or field or craft. So think about how complex you want to be. So for example here, if you are talking to a group of business folks who all have MBAs and you use some business school lingo, some jargon, that's fine. They're going to know exactly what you mean. However, if your client is a nonprofit who everyone there has a social work degree and you start using business school jargon, they're going to be very confused. So make sure that clarity is the key thing that you focus on with that language level. Also, don't try to use this as your opportunity to sound as smart as you possibly can. I know you're very smart, all of you are, but if your audience isn't going to respond favorably to that, maybe it'll confuse them a little bit or feel inferior, inept, then keep things on an appropriate level of complexity. And one way to do that is to use as many examples as possible, but don't pull these out of the sky. Use examples that really relate to your particular and specific clients. So for example, if you are using or you're working with a dry cleaner, let's say as an example, using some examples from the service industry is probably a better idea than to say something about an astronaut lost in space. It's sort of like if you were on a college campus and I said, imagine you're an astronaut, you're lost in space. What would you do? Whereas a better example, speaking to students, would be to say, imagine you're a freshman, first time ever on campus, and you're lost. What do you do? No one listening to this has ever been to space, but everyone probably has been a lost freshman on a campus. Think about what they can relate to and relate that information to your audience. All right, so now that we have talked a little bit about finding the core of the paper and getting that together, let's talk about some presentation basics. And we'll start with preparation, go through delivery, and then talk about something that is a huge barrier to many folks, and that's apprehension or being nervous. To begin with, please do organize and outline your presentation. Do this for your individual segment of the presentation and do it for the overall group presentation. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this. I'm showing you just these two main ones here, but on the left you'll see a concept map. This is going to be appealing for people who are visually minded. These are folks who really like to see things laid out in a consumable way without having to really follow this technical outline that you see on the right side. So with a concept map, you might start with an idea and break it down into its parts. And if you're going to talk to your client about a particular matter, you might break it down into some simple subpoints or to some really key details that they may want to know. Now, if you're more of a linear thinker, you might use a traditional outline layout. And you see that over on the right. It's something we're familiar with. Introduction, body, and conclusion. This is no different from a paper than it is for a presentation. You still have those three key parts. However, with the speech, you really want to think about what goes in each of those and identify it so that you can address it specifically. So for your attention getter, there are many ways to grab attention, but some of the most tried and true are shocking stats or facts. You know, if you put some information out there that people don't believe right off the bat is true, but it is, you'll cause cognitive dissonance. And that's a way to get people interested in your topic. You can start out with humor if it's appropriate, if you have that sort of client, that sort of presentation. And before you use humor, please make sure that you're funny. If you don't know if you're funny, you're probably not. So you might avoid it. However, there are others. So if you don't like the shock factor, you could always go with questions. Ask the audience questions. Now, you could do this through a show of hands style question. You could do it with a rhetorical question. What you don't want to do is actually ask a question that demands a verbal response. That can really throw off your timing. You never know if the person is going to give you a one-word response or a 30-minute response. And you don't want to be at the mercy of their timing in order to get through your timing. So show of hands works great. If you're concerned that not enough people are going to raise their hands, maybe you ask things like, raise your hand if you've ever been in a financial bind. And there's a few folks there that just haven't. Good for them, first of all. But they're not going to raise their hands. Now you feel sort of like that didn't go as planned. So say this instead. Ask this question. How many of you or someone that you know well has ever been in a financial bind? Now everyone's hand goes up and everyone is more invested because you broadened it out to not just the people in the room, but the people that they know. Another way to get attention, last one I'll tell you, is a story. These work really well. Humans are naturally storytellers. This goes back to our ancient days. Before we had writing, we spoke to each other. And telling a story that is interesting and applies to the topic is a great way to grab the audience and keep them engaged. What you can really do in a perfect scenario is to start a story, get to a very interesting, almost sort of climactic point, and then stop telling the story, leave them on a cliffhanger, then deliver your speech, all the good content in there, and finally finish up at the very end with the conclusion of your story. They're going to hang on every word because they want to know how the story ends, so they're listening for that. So there are your options for attention getters, the key ones anyway. Shocking facts or statistics, humor if appropriate, the use of questions and stories. Now, once you get their attention, notice that you're going to introduce yourself, your topic, your group in this case, next. Please don't start with, hi, our names are, and we're here to talk about. Start with the attention getter, then introduce yourself and your group. I promise it feels weird, but it's a much more effective ordering of your segments of the introduction. So once you do those two things, think about your thesis or your central idea. State it clearly. I like to give my audience a clear reason to listen and say things like, by the end of today's talk, you should agree that our idea will save you money, or whatever your specific purpose is, but make it explicit. Then finally in the introduction, preview your points. People like to know what's about to happen anytime. That's why we don't like the dark. It's not really because there's a lack of light. It's because there's a lack of knowing what comes next. You might bump into something. So if you tell them, today I'm going to talk to you about the research that I did, the idea I've come up with, and the way that it will positively affect you and your organization, we know sort of what you're about to lead us on. And at the end, it comes together well because you told them you were going to do something. And then if you stick to the script, you do it. That builds trust. People may not even consciously recognize it, but it does help. All right, so once you get through the introduction, move to your body. I won't spend much time here, but these are your main points. Just make sure each one is well thought out, and that if you have a complex idea, that you need to add some subpoints to explain it. Whereas if it's fairly simple, don't feel like you have to have 4 or 5 subpoints to explain something that's fairly cut and dry. The key thing I want you to take away from this, because you've done main points before in papers and probably speeches. I want you to focus on the transitions. I want you to focus on transitioning from one point to the next and one speaker to the next. And so if you think about you all as a group standing in front of this space, talking to clients, and you're about to switch from person one talking about the process that you went through to person two talking about the idea that you developed, please don't just stop abruptly or say things like, well, and now I've talked to you about that, so we're going to move on, and then let the other person start from there. No, don't do that. Instead, what I encourage you to do is to just watch a YouTube video of an effective local news team and just watch the transition. So, for example, when they move between the weather desk and the sports desk, they hand things off in usually a pretty effective way. So the weather person might say things like, well, it's going to be a really warm week here in Grand Rapids. I hope everybody's ready for shorts weather because it could be the last really warm weekend of summer. And that seems to be really in line with some outdoor activities we have. Isn't that right, sports person? Indeed it is, weather person. We have the Whitecaps tonight. They are at home against the whoever's, and they've handed it off, and it felt seamless. And while that's a little bit of a corny example, especially when I'm not there to tell you and you're just listening to my voice, I hope you get the idea here. And if not, again, watch that happen on a YouTube video or on a live broadcast. It feels natural. People are used to hearing it that way, and it could work for you very well. The last thing I'll say about transitions between speakers, it's not enough to just have that nice oral transition. Also have a physical transition. So, there's no right or wrong way to sort of be up in front of the class. Maybe you'll be some to one side, some to the other, or everyone in a line. I don't know. Work that out for yourself. But at least think about it and come up with a plan. However, when you transition, the person speaking should be forward of everyone else. They should step out front. And as they're about to wrap up, they should step back toward everyone else, and the next speaker should assume that role just before they actually start speaking. And that will help the physical transition seem, again, seamless, just like the oral one. All right, so we've got the introduction, we've got the body. Now let's just quickly do the conclusion. The two things I want you to remember about this, one is to have a review, just like your preview. Today we're going to talk about ABC. Go to your conclusion and say, today we talked about ABC. Remember, I just told you that if you give them a plan of what you're going to do and then you do it in the body, that builds trust because you kept your word. This is where you show them that you indeed kept your word. Last but not least is closure. This is where you finish strong. Don't end with, and are there any questions? Or that's all we have, and that concludes our talk. That's not what you're at. You're not the level you're on. You're above that. And so what I want you to do is to think back about the first thing we said, which is an attention getter. Remember the questions, the facts, statistics, humor, or story. Whatever you picked for that, do it again with the closure. At this point, we should be thinking about it a little differently. So if you said, how many of you or someone you know have ever been in a financial bind, come back down to the closure and reference that. Say, every one of you raised your hand when I asked about being in a financial bind. Well, I understand, just like for an individual, it works the same way for a business. However, the plan we've presented today really clears things up for you. And then finish strong. Leave them on a high note. And my advice is to pitch that idea. You're going to pitch it throughout, but pitch it at the end. That's the last thing they will remember. The last thing you say is the best thing they'll remember. And that should be you telling them that you understand their needs and that you can satisfy those needs. All right. So once we organize things, we've got things in an outline format, we need to practice. You would study for a test, so you should definitely practice for a presentation. The problem is that some people don't practice what I call the right way. You'll see on the screen. You should do this out loud, with your notes, with your visual aid, standing up, with your group also, if at all possible. I know that's hard to do sometimes. But some folks will sit quietly and read to themselves what they want to say out loud. And that's not practicing. That's simply reading. It might be studying, but it's not practicing or rehearsing. With your group, if it is tough to get together, record yourself. time yourself to make sure you are on the right sort of time frame for your requirement. But then if you have all those recordings, it's 2018, you can do this digitally. Go ahead and look at them together and time that. See how the handoffs might look. But again, the best practice is to do it together live as a group, because at that point you can evaluate not just yourself on your recording, but the entire group together. Once you practice, one thing you should practice for and be ready to do is to deliver in a conversational way. Have an idea in your mind of someone who you are very comfortable around but you respect greatly. How do you speak when you're talking to or with that person? You're probably at a pretty relaxed rate, but you may pronounce words a little more formally than you might otherwise. If you're a mumbler, I try not to mumble, especially right now, but I do it from time to time. So however you contort your voice, do it that way with your presentation. Similarly, with your gestures, your posture, your body. With that person that you're comfortable with but respect, you're going to naturally gesture. You're not going to look like a statue stuck in concrete. You're going to point left if you say left, or point right if you say right. Put your hands close together for things like a small something, or use your index finger and your thumb to show small, where you might put your hands up and wide to show something that's large. So be purposeful with those gestures. Same thing with posture, is to really do this as you would naturally with that person. You're not going to slouch around that person because you respect them very much. However, you're not going to be rigid and stiff because you're comfortable with them. So find that happy medium between way relaxed and way formal, and that's where you need to be. You want to be professional, but you also want to be approachable. Same thing works with your specific verbal delivery. Choose the words for the occasion. What words fit best here? We've talked about jargon and avoiding that if necessary, but give that thought of, is it proper to avoid it, or is it okay to include it? When you think about, again, pronunciation and articulation, we discussed that briefly, but the key thing that I have noticed over years of watching oral presentations, speeches, competitions, is that some folks drop the volume at the end of their sentence. Let me do that again by actually saying it. Some people drop the volume at the end of the sentence. Did you hear the difference? It was hard to pick up on those final two words of the line. If you do that in a presentation, chances are it will be fine, but it could simply annoy your audience, or they may miss something crucial because it came in the last word of the sentence. So make sure that you're keeping that on a nice even keel. You don't have to go up like British English does often, but definitely stay on a level that we can understand. With rate, again, if you're with that person, you're not going to run through your presentation, but you're not going to crawl through it either. Now, we'll get to anxiety, but when people get nervous, spoiler alert, they usually talk way too fast. And so if that's you, maybe dealing with anxiety can help correct the rate issue. But be mindful of how fast you're talking and have natural changes in pitch. You don't want to be monotone during a presentation, especially like this. You don't want people to get bored. And for some people, that's a challenge because they may be a little monotone naturally. Now, for others, they may not naturally be monotone, but when they start a presentation, a formal talk, they get monotone because they feel like that's their customer service voice or their speaking voice. And I understand all of that, but try to think about conversations again. If you're giving someone great news, man, everything goes up. Your pitch, your rate. But if you're giving them bad news, well, everything kind of slows down and drops a little bit. So don't lose that natural shift when you are in a presentation. What about nonverbal delivery? Well, we've talked about your face, and while I was kidding about buying a particular brand, I will tell you I do, as a proud man, carry a tube of concealer in my conference bag in case I have a breakout that day. But you do want to think about your personal appearance and how that affects your credibility. This could be things like your appearance in terms of your clothing, your body language, those sorts of things. But it also goes into things like movement, gestures, eye contact, and how you work together as a group. Let me go back to your appearance and simply tell you this. Think about your audience. When you're deciding what to wear, think about your audience, your client, and think about how they dress at work. Then think about what one single step above that would look like. It's different for men and women. I don't want to get into the fashion rights and wrongs because that's not my area, but I will tell you that you want to dress one step above, but not two. If you go two steps above, you could really look sort of maybe pretentious, and you don't want to do that. But if you go below, you may look like you just don't care. You're apathetic. For example, if you're going into a bank and everyone wears a suit every day, well, you should probably look your best. But if you're going to a mom and pop oil change outlet, you probably don't want to come in all suited up because everybody there is covered in grease. So think about that before you make those dress choices. For your movement, do have some. Don't sway back and forth. Don't pace back and forth. But some easy things you can do is one I call just the two-step. And that is when you are standing with your feet firmly planted and you may take 1-2 steps and turn slightly to the left. Stay there, deliver a main point. Then when you're ready to transition, 1-2 steps to the right. Stay there and deliver that main point. Now, the whole time your head is swiveling, so you're making eye contact with everyone, but your body's oriented in different directions. That's very simple to do. If you like that, maybe try a more advanced approach, which is called the speaker's triangle. And that's when you think about an imagined triangle on the ground, and you start out in the center of it, and each of the 3 points, you can label those 1, 2, 3, are your 3 main points. So as you begin main point 1, you may walk out to the tip, the front tip in front of you. Then when you go to 2, you might walk to the back, then 3, and so on. When you finish, you can go right back to the middle. What you've got to remember to do in all of these is to move and talk at the same time. Some people really don't quite get that, and it's because they don't practice enough. But you will want to speak naturally and move naturally so it looks, again, seamless, not forced. Gestures, have those as well. You don't have to direct air traffic with your hands, but you definitely should be purposeful. Again, small, large, left, right, those sorts of things. Eye contact is crucial. In our culture, eye contact, it communicates so much, but the key things for you are honesty, that you're being honest with someone because you can look them in the eye and say, I have an idea that's good for you. If you have to read, if you have to depend on your notes too much, you're not going to be able to make enough eye contact. So practice not getting rid of the notes, but using them as little as possible. Now for groups, think about what you're going to look at when you're not speaking. Don't look at the ground. Don't look at your watch. Don't look down at your jewelry or nails. Don't look around the room. Look at the speaker. Consider yourself sort of a funnel. If the audience, some member looks at you and you're looking at the speaker, then they are going to look at the speaker. But if you're looking in the opposite corner of the room, they're going to look back there to see what you're looking at. So focus on the speaker, and that will help everyone in the room stay where they should. All right, so we've got some ideas about practicing, organizing, delivering this speech. One of the biggest challenges you will face, though, will be being nervous. And that's very normal. In fact, I'm not there to ask you this and see your hands go up, but if someone didn't raise their hand, when I say, do you get at least slightly nervous for a presentation, that'd be trouble. Everyone should raise their hand. Now, some people get very nervous. Some people it's extremely mild. But nervous is normal. I mean, it's up there with American fears like snakes and death. And I don't have a silver bullet. If I did have the magic spell to fix all this, I wouldn't be making this recording. I'd be on the beach in Monaco. But there are some things I can share with you that might be useful. The first one, and to me the most important, is the illusion of transparency. I know that's a relatively new idea for you, but what it means is simply this. When you're in front of an audience and feel nervous, it always feels worse to you than it looks to the audience. In other words, they can't see those internal struggles. They don't see your stomach that's upset. They don't see your negative thinking. They don't see the micro shaking that's going on. You feel like they can see all of that, but they can't. So keep that in mind. That's sort of the silver lining, is that you aren't appearing to be as nervous as you might feel. Now, how can you deal with some of these other symptoms that you might encounter? Well, I've got 3 on the screen, but if you make it a point to make yourself nervous or think back to a time when you were. Pick out your symptom. Think about that for just a second. What was your symptom of speaking in front of people? How did the anxiety hit you? And it could be more than one way. Once you figure that out, think about the three that are up. Your stomach. Now, I don't have anything that once your stomach is upset, I can tell you to do or take that will instantly calm you down. What I can tell you is preventative. So, for example, if your stomach gets nervous, don't eat a large or greasy meal before your presentation. Don't drink carbonated beverages before your presentation. Eat something very plain and simple and drink water. That's going to keep your stomach at a nice neutral level, and the closer you can stay to that is preferred. Sweating. Some people start to sweat when they get nervous. Your body temperature rises. And because of that, they think they should wear thinner clothes, cooler clothes for their presentation. And that's actually backwards. It's not the temperature of the room that's making you hot and sweating. It's the internal pressure. So wear darker clothes that will cover up your sweat so we can't see it as much. This could be a thicker piece of material, so we can't see it coming through, or it could just be something black, for example, where unless we look really closely, we're not going to see it. What you should definitely avoid, though, are nice blue, pale blue pastel shirts. Those in similar colors and material will show sweat or highlight sweat, and it stands out in a way that you don't want it to. Last on this list is the rapid heartbeat. Again, there's nothing I can tell you to do or take after this happens, but preventatively, do a couple things. First of all, don't be late to class that day, because if you have to run to get there, your heart rate's already going to go up. Avoid stimulants like coffee, caffeine, whatever other stimulants you might use, but don't do that on speech day because you don't want to put extra stress on your heart. And last but not least, make sure that you're really trying to think positively so that your heart is not going to race as much. Practicing does help with this. God forbid, though, you're late because you stopped for coffee, and so now you run to get to class. When you get there, because of the running, you're thirsty, so you drink your coffee. Then you have to go give your presentation. You might die. Don't do this to yourself. It's not worth it. So make sure you're preventative with your approaches to your symptoms. Otherwise, here are some general tips for anxiety. First of all, the more speaking experience you can gain, the better. I know this can be tough to do, but if you're in a group, an organization, ask for speaking roles. Just try it out so that you can be around folks that you know and be comfortable speaking. If that doesn't work, ask questions in class or talk to strangers in line. I know it's awkward, but if you can do that, you can do this. Second, stay positive. Think positively. If you get yourself in the situation of thinking you're going to fail, your chances of failure increase. And while thinking positively doesn't make positive things happen on its own, it is a foundational move. You want to stay positive. Related to that is to visualize positivity. Think about athletes when they are on the on-deck circle, for example, in baseball or softball, on the free throw line at basketball. These folks are pretending to do what they're really about to do. They're seeing themselves be successful before they take the action. You can do that with the presentation as well. If you're really nervous and you're seeing yourself at night, lay there and think, oh God, this is going to be awful. Replace those thoughts. Picture yourself being successful. The next thing, don't expect perfection. It's not possible. I mean, the closest thing to perfect we have in terms of presentations is the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. King. Even in that speech, I can show you 2 places where he made an error. And that's not to take away from the speech at all. That's to tell you if what we have when it comes to the closest thing to a perfect speaker that we have recorded can make an error, you probably will make at least 2 errors. So don't beat yourself up. The key thing there is to move on. When small errors become big errors, or when people say things like, oh my gosh, I messed up, I'm so sorry, I screwed that up, let me start over. No, just keep moving. Take a minute, take a second, matter of fact, and then move on. Deep breathing exercises seem a little cliche to some folks, but they work. I like to use 4 square breathing. You breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold empty for 4 seconds. What that does is 2 things. First, physically, it limits the oxygen going into your body, so your heart rate slows down. Mentally, it makes you count to 4 over and over again, which leaves no room for negative thoughts. So it's a nice little physical and mental trick. Next to last, be in top condition. In other words, make sure you're hydrated. We'll leave it at that. Make sure you get enough sleep the night before. I know that can be in hard demand, short supply, but try to be as prepared as you can physically. And speaking of being prepared, be prepared for the presentation. Practice this thing the right way enough to where you can walk in and not feel nervous. You're just ready to do it and be done. And that is what you're really looking for. It's like a test. If it's a surprise to you, you may get nervous. But if it's something you've prepared for and you know that you know the material, it's just a matter of getting it done. All right, so we've talked about some ideas from a paper to a presentation. We've done some delivery elements along with apprehension. Let's finish this thing up with effective visual aids. And I'll focus on PowerPoint, though there are others. I don't like Prezi. It actually is associated with a medical disorder called preselepsy. So if you have someone in your audience who is epileptic, a trigger could be that this could be a trigger for a seizure if things move too quickly and too flashy on the screen. So I like PowerPoint. Couple things to think about. And again, you've worked with this your whole life, but think about simply the font size. How big is the room? How big does your font need to be? Make that call. When you're making it, remember not to overload slides. The slide on your screen right now there's just way too much text there. I know in some courses you have seen professors use this sort of style when it comes to PowerPoint. And while they are experts in their field, making PowerPoints is not their field, it's mine. And I'm telling you, you do not want all of this information on a slide. Think about everything that's there. You can read it if you want, but the same thing can be done in this format. It's the same information. It just relies on you, the speaker, to fill in the gaps. Now, this slide's better, but it's not great. We have too much white space, so we spread things out. Well, we still have half the slide empty, so most folks would add a picture, and you're right, put an image on there. However, make sure that you use a useful image. If you look closely, you'll see that this presenter has an overloaded slide on my slide about overloaded slides. Super meta. So make sure that you're not just going for any old, stock photo out there. And for my sake, please, and don't tell them you know me if you do this, don't use an image with a watermark on it. Find one without. And if you feel like you need to cite those, go for it. All right, so I just told you don't use flashy animations with Prezi. So if you're epileptic, close your eyes for a second because I'm going to show you how that can still happen in PowerPoint. It's overkill is what it is. There's no need for it. Now, if you're talking to a group of children that need to have flashy things to keep their attention, you use it, but not here. Things like stars spinning in and shooting across and fireworks and spinning. Again, that's not something you want to do in a professional presentation. So stay away from that. What about charts and graphs? This is a history of home values from, it looks like 1890 to about 2008, right before the housing crisis struck. So this is nice. I like this. I can follow this line. I see these highlighted areas. They've got labels as to what events were happening, world wars, Great Depression, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of type up there at the top that is hard to read on a regular PowerPoint slide. So get rid of it. All you do is drop a white box over and then throw on a text box. Now you could even go further and make that prettier font or fitting to what you like or your overall presentation. You could center it, but make it your own, and it's easy to fix. Similarly, maybe you have to talk about a Tyrannosaurus. Okay, great. You could use this elementary school science book sketch, or you might use something like this. We could talk about an actual image. This is the T-Rex in Chicago at the Field Museum, but you can enter your own identifiers instead of using those that are just from a clear science book. Now with this one, you can do a few different things. You can make these fly in on their own. So instead of using animations, because I just told you don't do that, what you can do is start with the blank T-Rex slide. So just the image of the skeleton. Then make it like it looks now. So you've got all three of your labels or more if you need it. Then duplicate that slide as many times plus one as there are labels. Then go backwards from the last instance of the slide and delete one of those labels in the order backwards that you want them to appear. So now you'll have 6 or 7 slides maybe of this skeleton, but each one has a different number of labels on there, and they look like they're just appearing out of nowhere on the same slide, but you're actually using multiple slides. Similarly, with a chart like this, it seems very clear, but maybe you want to talk about it overall the way it is now, but then you want us to zoom in, focus in on management in general at 16%. Well, just duplicate that slide and then add a color box over it. Again, you probably are aware of most of these, if not all of these and more, PowerPoint tips and tricks, but make sure you go that extra step. You don't want the reason that you have a negative presentation or you don't get the deal to be because you didn't give that extra few minutes on your PowerPoint. Make sure it's as nice as it can be. Again, think about what they might make one like and make one a little bit better. All right, so today we talked about papers and presentations, their similarities and differences. We talked about presentation basics, everything from organizing, delivery, to dealing with anxiety. And last, we just finished up with some ideas about an effective visual aid. So again, what we want to do is take what you're familiar with, the paper, and you do write one for this class, but then go through that as a group and determine what should be left in, what can be left out, what the audience does and does not want or need to know, and what your time limit is. And that will help you turn that paper into an effective presentation. And while you're working on this, don't forget the Speech Lab's here to help. We have almost 19 consultants now, and we have hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays, more than ever downtown. So if that fits your schedule, we are in the Pew Library in the Steelcase collaboration zone. So if you come over there and find us Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're there from noon. Tuesdays noon until 8 p.m. and then Thursday noon until 8, with the exception take a break from 4 to 6. So if you have time or want to come over, feel free. We also have tons of hours in Allendale if you're in that neck of the woods, but we are here to help. So with that, if you have any questions on any of this, Dr. Hinch has heard this a few times, so he may be able to answer those, but feel free to email me or the Speech Lab. In fact, the easiest thing to do is probably go through the Speech Lab, gvsu.edu/speechlab, and that will have all of the contact information you need. So when you prepare for this thing, you don't have to be the super salesperson like we may see at some kiosks at the mall that make you spend, or at least make me spend, way too much money. But you should be a little bit better now at thinking about an effective presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope to hear from you soon. Good luck on your assignment.